Just going to give people a chance to log in here before we get started. Waiting on Dr. Yehuda to join us. I'm going to go ahead and get us started here. So I am Dr. Brown. Like I said, I am a proud alum of Africana Studies, African American Studies, Africology at Temple University. I did my PhD there. I'm now an assistant professor at the University of Delaware, and my focus is race, sports, and culture, and all of the intersections that involve that. Now, a lot of the work that I do really does revolve around particularly black males in the sporting world, right? Not just athletes, but all those in the sporting world. It does, of course, involve other folks, black women, and different folks. I touch on different issues like LGBTQ issues, issues when it comes to just a lot of different types of black people within and around the sporting world. A few years ago, I put together an edited volume called Sports in African American Life, Essays on History and Culture. This is it's a really great book in terms of looking at a lot of different issues. Some of the things are very unique about this edited volume as to other edited volumes. One of the things that I covered in here that I made sure that we covered was, of course, the history, but also this social responsibility, social justice and responsibility. And so when we're talking about some of the things that we're dealing with even now, having this book come out earlier this year and addressing some of the issues, some of the social justice issues, some of the issues on Black responsibility or Black athlete responsibility, it was very poignant at the time that this came out. The book just got released in February, so it is still brand new. Tons of great scholars that are in it that touch on different things. We also put in this book a section on gender and identity, which is where my section is, and then one on media and art, which I think was very unique for a book on sports to have one that looked at art and looked at media representations. I think that was an important piece for this book. If you look at the cover here, the cover, just kind of give a little inside track on this. The cover was actually a little bit different when the publisher first gave it to me. There were two different black male athletes on here, and of course we don't want to exclude black women when we're talking about sports. As if black women don't exist. That was very egregious, I think, of the publishers. But I demanded that there be a black woman on this, and so what they did is they put a picture here of this black woman, and if you don't know her, this is Maya Moore, which is extremely important because Maya Moore just this past year bypassed a second WNBA season so that she could help out a black brother named Jonathan Irons, who was sentenced to 50 years in prison at the age of 18 years old. So you got to understand, this black woman athlete is bypassing her career to help out, to help free a wrongly convicted and imprisoned brother, right? And so when we talk about some of the things, I know Dr. Yehudah is going to talk about things in terms of what athletes should be doing or could be doing with their platform. But that's just something kind of an inside thing on the cover of this book and what makes this so important or so significant, just the cover itself. But I introduced myself. Now that we got Dr. Yehudah here, I'm going to allow Dr. Yehudah to introduce himself.
Yeah, well, firstly, I got to give thanks for my life, for being here, to the Most High for bringing me here, and in good health, and allowing me to breathe breath. And I'm Dr. Mikaya Yehuda. Right now I operate out of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York, right outside of Albany, New York. Yeah, my research interest, my dissertation was on the African Hebrew Israelites of Jerusalem, and the topic was seizing the power to define Afrocentric inquiry in the African Hebrew Israelites of Jerusalem. And really my research looked at this very special group who left Chicago in 1968 to resettle in the state of Israel. And they've been there ever since. And in fact, I think they've just finished celebrating their 50th year out in Israel. But my research after that has looked at other, you know, Hebrew groups, or what people will commonly refer to as Hebrew, that are dispersed throughout the world, looking at some of their epistemological ways, how they think about existence, how they think about reality, and also looking at their structure, how they structure themselves best to address the realities that, you know, are important to them, and important to their generations to come. So
me and Mikaya, you know, we attended Temple University as PhD students together. We are, of course, good friends. And so this is for me and you, Mikaya, this is really going to be more of a conversation. But let's talk about that. You talked about your dissertation, and how doing your dissertation at Temple University provided you with this sort of methodology, right? This theoretical framework to approach your work. I did as well. Dr. Asante was my dissertation chair. And so I utilized this notion of Africology as sort of a disciplinary or a methodological framework. How did you utilize Africology? What does that mean to you? How did you utilize it? And then what did that do for the article in this book, if you want to kind of summarize or explain what your article is about?
Afrocentric inquiry requires one to really center that question in the middle of any phenomena that they research. What does this mean to Black folks?
Yes. That's huge, right? I think that's huge.
What does this mean to Black
folks? When I was doing my dissertation, I was studying how Black NFL prospects viewed manhood. And really, when we talk even about manhood and whatnot, we have to distinguish. We can't just be using the sort of Eurocentric, hegemonic, or Western ideas of manhood, right? What does manhood mean for Black folks, right? And that's the real question, right? Looking at it from that perspective, things that we would assume are, even on a moral level, right? Things that are good or bad in society may be different when we're looking at it from the perspective of Black folks. And I think that's what's also connects our two chapters, right? Is that coming from this sort of Afrocentric or Africology sort of mode or methodology and approach, it really looks at these things from the Black perspective. We're not saying that, well, these athletes are good because look how money they make for the university. But no, what does that have to do for Black people? Right? What's that have to do for the Black people? What does that have to do with what's beneficial to the Black community? Right? And that's the approach that I think that you're talking about.
Yeah, that's Black studies. Black studies, Africology is Black studies. It's Africana studies in its purest form, meaning that the questions that we ask, the framework that we even assume comes from an African experience. I mean, if you're not African, then you're not going to ask questions from that experience. It just makes sense. But if we are African, then we shouldn't be asking questions or making assumptions based on another people's inheritance. Or on a basic level, if I'm of a certain tribe, I'm not going to ask questions about what my research or what my questions mean for that other tribe without at least asking what it means for my own tribe. So that's what Black studies is. That's what Africology is. That's what Africana studies is in its purest form. So when I did this this piece for your book, I was essentially asking, is the sports industry benefiting Black people? And then what way could it benefit Black people? And then if not, what could benefit Black people? So those are the questions, those are just some of the underlying questions that I asked when I look at the sports industries, specifically as playing the Black folks.
Yeah, and so for me, my chapter, I look more of a case study to try to expose the systematic ways that Black men specifically are really used up by the sports industry, right? That there's this entire sort of institutionalized process that just takes advantage of Black youth, right? Particularly Black men when it comes to them getting exposed to sports, getting into sports, getting recruited, getting matriculating through college, well on scholarship, and then sort of dangling the carrot of the NBA or the NFL over their head, and how that gets them sort of motivated while being exploited at the same time, right? And so it's just exposing this level of exploitation that Black men go through. It's not just the fact that they're making or they're producing, their labor is producing entertainment that's making lots of money for the school. We understand that. But it's not just that in terms of exploitation. It's all the other stuff that comes with that exploitation. It's not allowing them to be able to major in things they want to major. It's about misadvising them so that they don't matriculate property. It's about not developing them in ways that are going to benefit them outside of sports that eventually is going to come at a young age. That all along the way, they are being deprived of these things just so they can continue to produce and create revenue for people a lot of times don't even look like them. Right?
Right. It's a colonial, the sports industry is a colonial enterprise. It's a tentacle of the colonial empire. So if we look at it in that way, then all that it purports to do is to really extend what colonialism does, which is to create a system by which it can drain the blood of its subjects and fuel its life as it goes on and on and on. Now, with the colonial enterprise, the colonizer makes itself as the deity, right? Whereas the black person, the black athlete is already a black person who is already the subject. But what is unique about the American colonial system is that the deity is the colonizer. The colonized is like the demon. It's like the anti-human, so that's why when we get athletes try to speak up about politics, they're told what?
Yeah.
Shut up and play. It's the same way in entertainment. Ice Cube tries to talk about politics, shut up and entertain. So it's that same idea that you're only good to us for your body. But the ill thing about that is that the mind is important, but they just don't want it to be in your head. So they take the ideas, they're thefts. They will steal your ideas in a second, but you won't get credit for it, and you better not even try to explain it as if it's your idea.
I think as we talk more, we'll talk about the different models that you have, but I think it begs the question that, is it even possible to rearrange? And I know that you talk about this in your chapter about using the master's tools to tear down the master's house, right? That is it possible to rearrange the system so that it works in our benefit, right? Or is it just a lost cause that has to be dismantled totally, right? Can LeBron James change the NBA so that it stops exploiting black people and starts working towards the benefit of black communities? And looking at these things, we have to acknowledge that anytime black people have gotten progress in white institutions, white people will then, or these white institutions will then change those institutions and change the way I look at the NFL quarterbacks and how many black NFL quarterbacks there are after being marginalized and alienated and stacked in other positions, were marginalized and alienated, restricted for, more or less from the quarterback position. Now we have more black quarterbacks than ever, but the quarterback position has changed. The way in which they talk about these quarterbacks has changed. The way in which these quarterbacks are placed in these positions of influence and all of that has changed. So yes, these things can change and change form, but so are the institutions.
Yeah. Absolutely. I don't know. I think we've tried for the past 100-something years, and I think colonial sports people in colonial zones have also tried, to use sports as a catalyst to prove, to folks their humanity. But, I don't think that you have to beg anyone to display your humanity, and you really don't even have to beg anyone to produce institutions of your own. And I don't know. I don't think, people can keep trying to create space in these entities, or you can take the next step and do what Ice Cube did, and formed a basketball tournament. It's still kind of in competition with colonial sports industry, basketball, NBA, but I think it's a step towards, creating your own sports institution that parallels with your culture.
Absolutely.
We talked about this during grad school. You look at the walls in ancient Egypt, you see sports. You see martial arts. You see people, doing archery. You see racing. So sports existed since the pyramids and probably before that. And but it wasn't exploitative. It was there in a sense to it was entertainment. But it was recreation, but it was functional in the sense that people are going to use martial arts. People are going to fish. People are going to shoot bow and arrows. People
Yeah.
are going to run. That's natural things that happen in society.
Yeah.
So that's really the question. I mean, people would say it's a revolutionary approach to sports, but I just say it's a practical way to sports. It's a practical way to really maintain
Sure.
your dignity. You can maintain your physical fitness, maintain your health, but really, essentially, to
Yeah,
maintain your
but
dignity.
so my chapter, it looks at two people. It looks at Rasheed Jordan, right, which is actually a
Mhm.
Philadelphia native. He was one of the top prospects out of Pennsylvania, right? They call him the Prince of North Philly, right? The Prince of North Philadelphia. And
Right.
everything that went on to him, kind of, I'll just talk about this for a minute. But Rasheed Jordan came out of North Philadelphia. He ended up being recruited by all these different schools, one of the top prospects in Pennsylvania. He ended up jumping from commitment to commitment. He was committed to Temple for a minute. Then he was committed to St. John's. He ended up going to St. John's. While he was at St. John's, he actually got sort of misadvised by academic advisors on what he can and can't do and what he should or shouldn't do. He ended up then trying to declare for the NBA, but then tried to not declare or decommit to going into the draft, and then going back to the school where they told him he was able to do that. And then based on his academics, he was going to transfer to another school and then transfer back. But based on the information he got, he wasn't able to play because of the transferring that he did, right? Even though he didn't play for any other school or even go to a campus. And so it was this mismanagement or misadvising of him that made it so that he had to declare for the draft, the supplemental draft, and whatnot. Ended up not getting drafted where he wanted to. Had to go to the D League, right? And what happened with him is that he was sort of ill prepared and had made some other issues going on off the court that caused a lot of issues when he didn't get drafted and didn't capture the carrot, so to speak. That he didn't get that big payday, but was coming out of North Philly where so many people were actually banking on him, have actually invested in him going to the NBA. When he didn't have that big payday, all of that stuff then came back and he had to account for some of these things. One thing led to another as he was back in Philadelphia, and as reported, he had to defend himself in an altercation and ended up getting charged with attempted murder. He actually served 3.5 years and just got out last February. And he's now doing lots of work in North Philadelphia with the youth, talking about different sort of decisions that youth are making to the basketball players that are looking to go to college and go to the NBA, talking to them about that process so that they don't replicate those same mistakes. But understand that it wasn't just Rasheed Jordan that was at fault here. It was the system that failed him. That there were many instances along the way where he was being misinformed, mismanaged, told things that weren't in his best interest, also that he can become eligible to participate in an institution that doesn't even make him money at that point in college and in high school, right? The other person that I talk about in this is a gentleman by the name of, in the film, his name is Boobie Miles. Now, this story of Boobie Miles, when we look at this, right, it comes from Friday Night Lights. But we have to understand that the movie of Friday Night Lights, it was an entertaining movie in itself. The movie is after an actual real team in Texas. And Boobie Miles, the character of Boobie Miles, is actually a real person. That the entire high school and all of the people in this brother's life were telling him that he was an NFL prospect. He was going to go to college. He was going to go to the NFL. And so he put away all of these other aspirations. He didn't develop himself academically. He didn't develop himself in terms of his personal maturity. He didn't develop himself in terms of his Black identity, right? This is what is called identity foreclosure, where you only hone in on one identity, and that was the athletic identity. But then he got injured, his senior year, and he couldn't play football again. And there goes that part of his identity, right? You're no longer an athlete. If you put 90% of your identity in an athletic identity and then athletics leaves your life, what do you have left in terms of who you are, right? In terms of what you can do if you haven't been prepared. And so this is something that the character Booby Miles goes through in real life. And so it's these institutions like Rashid Jordan Booby Miles' character that are influential in the destruction of and lack of preparation for Black men and increasingly Black women. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. But so I talk about the different institutions. Sorry, I talk about the institutions that set them up for failure and don't prepare them. And you talk about the institution itself and how, well, it was never meant to do that to begin with.
Right. You know, as I said before, it's a colonial enterprise. So its job is to take your blood and use it to drive its industry and drive its empire. So you have all-stars that are created, and the all-stars become tokens. They become exemplars, you know, for what you should do. So in the chapter, I had three models of sports athletes.
Sorry.
It was called Refusing to Play Their Games.
Okay.
Refusing to play their games.
A
There's other parts to the title.
And a Robesonian a proposition on sports, race, and divestment.
Right. So, yeah, dealing with pretty much how you deal with the sports industry. And then there were models, and the models started out with a Michael Jordan model, and then it went up to Paul Robeson, which I wouldn't say is the end goal. I think it's a step, you know, but you start off with Michael Jordan, and then I had in the middle Muhammad Ali, and then at the top, and it's a hierarchical model. At the top of the model is Paul Robeson, and I'll explain why that was set up that way. But refusing to play their games, you know, meant literally, but also meant practically. You know, and the game in this sense is the entire sports industry, which has also kind of been set up to breed this identity foreclosure in young Black folks. You know, I grew up in Mount Vernon, New York, and I grew up around a lot of folks that life and careers hinged on their athletic prowess or their athletic talents. You know, I played sports all the way through college. You know, I played college football. And I think that I made some great decisions, but I think that I was prepared with other alternatives outside of what the system proposed for me. You know, and I think that when we talk about identity foreclosure means that you have one option and one option only. And if that option does not work out, then you're done. And that's what a colonial system does. It prepares the options for you. It prepares all your options for you. So, you know, it's like the election. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that.
What's crazy is that it also, like you said, it produces a system that causes Black folk to perpetuate the agenda of these sort of white-run institutions, so that when people like Rashid Jordan come through, it may be other Black folks participating in this sort of identity foreclosure, right? It may be Michael Jordan who's pushing this agenda, right? And this is why what's crazy is a lot of pro athletes will speak this as if it's like actually true, that when they're talking to young people, you all can make it to the NBA or the NFL or Major League Baseball. And the answer is no, they can't, right?
Right.
They have a 0.4% chance. Let's understand this. A 0.4, not even a whole percent, not even a 0.5% chance that they're going to make it pro. And if the shorter you are, the lower chances you have. And so this idea that everybody can make it pro is just false, right? Like, let's stop lying to folks, because what it does is it sets them up so that they try to get there. And in trying to get there, they become exploited. In trying to get there, they bypass the development of all these other things. To try to get there, it means they get inundated and really engulf themselves in the sports industry to be used up however these institutions want to use them.
It should be used, sports should be used as a vehicle to get more opportunities in society. Shouldn't be used as a means, end all be all. So what does that mean? That means if I'm talented and, I sign up for basketball or football or baseball, I'm going to use that to get the best education that I can get. I'm going to use that to get connected to the best schools that I can get. And I'm going to use my connections to get the best career that I can get. That's if, my goal is to exist peacefully in American society and be a productive citizen. And that's what I would do. And I mean, if that's people's approach, then we have to start thinking about it, like using it and not being used by it. I think that's the approach that folks got to take.
Yeah. And I definitely, before I forget, I want to shout out my co-author, Christina Canoe, from Clark Atlanta University. And, when we put this together, we put this chapter together, she really initiated the foundation of this chapter, just talking about the institutional failures that are negatively affecting Black boys and men. And, we have it in the gender identity section because it is specific to Black men, these stories and how they're exploited. You talked about these models like the Michael Jordan model and how Michael Jordan, in your chapter, how Michael Jordan really set the tone and was used by the institutions to kind of say, look, here's the blueprint. This is what all you other Black athletes should be. And a lot of people followed that, right? That you should say nothing about politics, say nothing about race and racial politics, just use all of your Black entertaining style to win games and entertain really predominantly white folks. That's who's going to games. These white folks in the stands, right? But you also need to dress in ways that make these white folks comfortable. So wear suit and ties when you show up, right? And this was like the Michael Jordan model. And then he said, he had a commercial that said, be like Mike. He blatantly says, be like me, right? As I engage in these sort of
right.
White digestible sort of forms of Blackness, right? And so this becomes the Michael Jordan model. Now, I say that to say because I do want to talk about where Black women fit into this, right? Black women athletes fighting for equality, right? Even fighting to create and establish the WNBA to be equal to the NBA. Here's some of the issues that come up, though. We're talking about how these institutions are exploiting Black men, right? We surely don't want to fight for Black women to have the same equal amount of exploitation as Black men, right, in these institutions, right? That something different has to come, right? The WNBA should be fighting for something different, fighting for something that's not so oppressive, right? And I say that because if we look at the trends, the same types of things are happening with the WNBA that are happening with the NFL and the NBA, even more egregious things. Do you know that right now, there are assistant coaches in the NBA that are women, assistant coaches that are women. There are women head coaches in the WNBA. But out of the assistant coaches that are women in the NBA and the women head coaches in the WNBA, not one of them are Black. We talk about this idea of exploitation and not allowing Black people at the table and whatnot. The WNBA is seeing similar things, right, in terms of being alienated and marginalized and degraded, right? And that's why we really should be fighting for the WNBA to have a different model. McCautry, Angel McCautry, she came up and is kind of she initiated some of the political activism that we see in the WNBA, right? I don't want to call her the Lebron James of the WNBA because she in her own right is an activist, a leading activist that actually put forth different things in WNBA that the NBA copied from and learned from, right? And so when you talk about these models, we have to make sure that Michael Jordan isn't the influence, not just for the NBA, but making sure that he's not the model for even the WNBA and black women.
All that I can say is Michael Jordan was, as you said, apolitical. He talked nothing about politics, but he encouraged others to be like him. I mean, he was a great athlete. I mean, there's no one that can compare to his talent level and the things that he accomplished physically. But off the court, I mean, he wasn't there. I mean, he was just a body, and that's what, as I said, that's what the colonial sports industry wants black folks to look and appear as, just a body. LeBron James. We talk about LeBron James. I like the way LeBron James approached this season and his previous seasons. Yeah, his leadership style is different, but off the court, he talks about things that I love to hear and things that resonate with me. And off the court, he's a family man. He has a wife. He has sons and daughters and children, and he has a very good image. But I look at the statements that are made against him, and people find all types of ways to minimize, what he is doing, and they compare him to Jordan, but they don't compare everything else off the court. Although on the court, his stats actually compare to Jordan's stats.
We don't want to get on that.
But I think that, yeah, we don't want to get in that discussion. But but in terms of being a black man in America, he's under attack because he represents everything that the colonial society says he shouldn't be. And that's that. So I would still put him in the Muhammad Ali category. I like Muhammad Ali as well, but I don't think that he's Paul Robeson yet. Paul Robeson left the sports industry, and he took his income while he was playing to put it towards political, entities that he was involved in. So he took the next step up where he said, I'm going to use this industry to really make an impact, and I don't need to be in the industry anymore to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's huge, right? I think that the Michael Jordan model really fails masses of black men and women, right? That we're not talking about those that have the Michael Jordan talent, even the LeBron James talent where you're one of one, right? Or you're the top 10 in the country, right? But we're talking about hundreds of thousands that also think they're going to make it and don't, right? That it sets all of them up for failure. And don't get me wrong, I think Michael Jordan, he did a lot for elevating the game. He did a lot for exposing, sports, or not just basketball. I also want to show that he's, my frat brother. Hey. But I will say that Michael Jordan model was so detrimental to black folks because it caused them to take on a position that was vulnerable and easily exploited by the institutions. But then we look at Muhammad Ali, and he utilizes that position to do some of the things that he wants to do. But what you're saying is powerful. Paul Robeson, though, was even more aligned, or that model is even more important for us than even Muhammad Ali, because Paul Robeson didn't look at it like, well, I'm going to engage in this thing, and then I'm going to engage in sports and then do what I can, right, while I'm in sports. He was like, no, this sports thing isn't benefiting my community, so I'm going to leave this and go do other things that do benefit my community, right? For those people that don't know, right, Paul Robeson was an All-American, a two-time All-American football player at Rutgers University. He was also leading scorer of the basketball team. He was catcher on the baseball team. He was part of the Glee Club. He ended up after two All-American selections in football, he became valedictorian of his graduating class at Rutgers. And then he goes on to law school. He actually played professional football to pay for law school. Right? And then he quits law because the stenographer didn't write down his words because he was black. So he quits law and goes to have a brilliant singing career, an acting career around the world, right? And he quit football to go pursue this and be politically engaged, which he was throughout the rest of his life, right? So when you talk about him,
Right, and he was made persona non grata in the United States after a while for trying to bring unity amongst the world's people. So you have this great athlete that's representing the United States in the best way. He's a star athlete, but he's brilliant intellectually. Like you said, he's in law school and he's in the NFL. But he tries to create connections between the wrong people, and he's labeled a communist, and then his passport is revoked. He has a lot of issues traveling, and that's how he earned his money. So, you leave the sports industry because you're like, well, I can make money on my own because I have a skill, I have a trade. And then what they do is they say, well, no, you're not doing that either. So, he ran into issues the same way Muhammad Ali ran into issues when they started Main Bout Inc., when he tried to create his own promotional company. They saw that the Nation of Islam was involved and they were trying to do something. Jim Brown was involved. You have other people involved. And after a while, they said, no, you can't do that. So it's not an easy step to take to step outside of what they tell you should be doing. You will get some punches thrown your way, but you can probably ask any of them at the end of the day, what they felt as they went through, a detachment from that which dehumanized them. And you can ask anyone in any industry that made a conscious decision to detach from dehumanization. I'm sure that they'll say, well, I'm glad that I detached from dehumanization.
Yeah. Now, the thing is that when we talk about this idea of detaching from a dehumanizing institution, right? And we talk about the Robeson model. We talk about, of course, the Michael Jordan model is not the way we want to go. The Ali model is like what we want to do. If we're going to be here, this is how we want to be here. And the Robeson model is, well, if we look at it as a dehumanized institution, then we just need to get the hell out, right? and do something else. So where does you use a Fanonian kind of approach, right? And even Fanon says that these oppressed people have this idea, to use sort of some other folks' words, that Paulo Freire's words, that it's the oppressed wanting to be like their oppressors. And Frantz Fanon has a similar sort of revelation that Black people, they really want to, some Black people really just want to have what white people have. And so they do the things and engage in the things that white people do and engage in, even when it comes to their mindset and their ideology, right? That how do we get athletes from wanting to follow Michael Jordan to wanting to follow Robeson?
I think their community, I think their homes have to mirror, those interests. So if everyone in your home is celebrating the black man athlete in your family, and that's all that there is to him, and he has no trade, his whole life and his whole career is binged upon making it to the NFL, then whoever that child is, whether it's a son or a daughter, is going to emulate that, because they're going to see they're going to see the mom, the father, the auntie, the uncle celebrating this athlete, because his whole career is banking on making it into the NFL. So, all the success in that community and in that household fringes upon this quest for what I call like a colonial inheritance. Whereas your natural inheritance should come from your parents, right? Your parents should leave land for you. They should leave something for you. But a colonial inheritance means that your parents are wiped out. The colony, the colonizer is the one that creates the inheritance for you. But the interesting thing about it is that there is really no inheritance. It's a lottery
every time.
And
right?
it's exactly what it is. So, but people have bit the forbidden fruit and agreed to it. So people will argue all day about, I'm surviving, as if survival is what your life destiny should be
Right.
just to survive. But that's a
Yeah.
colonial mentality. You're supposed to be producing, you're supposed to be creating institutions, you're supposed to be successful, at
Right.
succession. Your grandchildren, your great grandchildren
Yeah.
should be set up. So people need to look at it within their own families first to figure out, all right, so what is happening? What are we doing? What is not happening? What do we need to do in order to
Yeah.
change that?
Yeah.
And I think like these models that we move towards are not practical. These models are really just meant to keep going and ongoing and
Yeah.
ongoing. So we have to detach from, what we claim is good and what we claim is successful and what we claim as right and what we claim as uh, financially astute. We have to really have to have a real honest look at our families and at ourselves and figure out what it is that we really want and what it is that's actually a practical way of
Yes. Yes.
achieving it.
Yes. And I want to encourage folks to drop some questions. We have people monitoring the IG live right now. So drop any questions you have, and we'll answer these questions. I know there's some folks on here from our classes. There's some folks on here from Temple. Some folks that have been lively in the discussion. Obi, I see you. We even got some folks from Canada, right? My home country, on the line on the
Hey,
IG live right now as well. So big ups to them. But if you have any questions, go ahead and drop
big
that.
up to Cardinal
Say it again.
Official. I said big up to Cardinal Official. No one from Canada want to shout out Cardinal Official. Shout
Well,
outs.
and I was gonna say, I thought you were gonna say that might be the option, right? That we take off and go to Canada. No, so the thing with this is that when it comes to right, creating things that are for us, I think it's important to go bring it back to Africology. Africology, right? This Afrocentric sort of approach, this Africana studies that we do. A lot of times we say that this Africana studies is not something we study. Africana studies is something we do. Because it's not just about the work and about the research. It's not just about reading these people. It's about applying Africana studies principles, which means that if we're talking about building a better future, that from the perspective and the interest of Black folks and people of African descent, then that may mean making sure that you know all your Black neighbors in your neighborhood and building community there, right? That building your family and going into your family where you make sure that you're building with your brothers and sisters and children and nieces and nephews, right? That you're building those things, right? That we're using this approach that will be in the best, this model that's better for Black folks in the position and the context that we're in, instead of using these individualistic or even capitalistic models that are proposed by a lot of athletics and athletic institutions.
Right. So Africology would have you look at institutions from, that have taken place in Africa. They will look, so typical disciplinary approaches in academia in the West will make you think that every option that they present to you is the only option. That's what Western science does. That's what Eurocentric science does. It controls your options, and it gives you your options and your possibilities and your dreams. And if you woke up and you thought something differently, no, that was in the program that they're giving to you. So what Africology does, that approach, it has you to look at other alternatives. It has you to look at other approaches. So whether it be psychology, whether it be religion, whether it be biomedical engineering, whether it be sports, whether it be sociology, there's more than likely an African antecedent to it. And what Africology makes you do is look at that first before you choose one of those other options. And a pure Africology doesn't stop there. It looks at other approaches as well, because the idea is to figure out what is true, what is factual, what is functional, what works. And that's the challenge, because most people go to school, they don't know they're taking. People get upset with a Black history course or Black studies, but they don't know they're taking white history
Right.
and white
Right.
sociology and white
Right. You don't know all
psychology.
that.
They just don't put it before. Yeah, they just don't put it before
Right.
sociology. They just don't put it
Right.
before
But then
biomedical engineering.
they're gonna study
But
all white sociologists though. Right.
that's it. That's it. They might sprinkle in, you study sociology, they might sprinkle in a page of W.E. Du Bois at the beginning of the class. But you're gonna learn about, you're gonna learn about their sociologists and their way of doing sociology. I was teaching a class a couple of years ago, and we were looking at educational systems, and one of my students felt bold enough to say, well, you know, there were no educational systems in Africa. That's why this is all that we look at, because education didn't exist in Africa. And I said, well, I hear you, bro. I didn't call him bro, but I said, I hear you. I said, but how are pyramids created? People still to this day haven't figured it out. They say
Right.
aliens made them.
Ridiculous. Right.
You have
Right.
bona fide
But,
scientists
that's
but that's that universalism. They think because they don't know it
right.
that it can't be, and that's being self-centered and Eurocentric.
So that's really the way that I look at sports, right? My goal is to view sports from a more view blacks in sports, right, and Black sporting practices as being in a way that's more humanistic of Black people and those engaged in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That when we talk about Black people and we talk about Black sporting practices, we're looking at it through a culturally centered lens, right? One that is more appropriate for Black folks, that we're using our cultural interpretations to interpret and analyze the Black cultural productions that we've created, instead of using some foreign lens to try to interpret our cultural stuff.
Right.
And we risk a lot of misinterpretation. No, I'm going to use our cultural lens, right? And I'm going to do so in ways that help explain these things, not in dehumanizing ways, but in humanizing ways, right? And that's what I'm looking to do with my work. I know my future work is going to be looking at Black sporting culture of the 90s and the 2000s and explaining what the relevance of it was to Black people and how it was very much a form of cultural activism that was going on during that period in different ways, in the ways that athletes and people in sporting world dressed, talked, even the ways in which they played was culturally activism, was cultural activism, right? It was culturally African and involved African aesthetics in the style of play that they had, and why that's important, right? But that's really what the process of my research does, is it utilizes a certain methodology that is more beneficial and asks the questions based on the perspective and the interests of Black people, right? All right, so now we talk about like sports, and you're talking about some of your other research. How do we use this sort of theoretical approach or this methodological approach for other phenomena, right? Can we use, you talked about how studying, bioengineering and things like that, right? We can use this sort of approach to study all different types of phenomena, right?
Yeah.
We can use, it's not just sports.
Yeah.
It's not just looking at music. It's not just looking at sociology. We can use this for all of these things. Right?
You can study Irish culture using the Africological framework, because essentially the question you're asking is, how does this pertain to us? How does this pertain to people of African descent? So when you're studying, the idea is to pull out, number one, the facts and the information, and to analyze the information without bias, or without any type of inkling that just pushes something away because you don't like it. What you're going to do is you're going to investigate it, you're going to explore it. So if there's something good about it and it's relevant to your community and it's relevant to those that you're building with, you're going to use it. If it comes from Europe, then sure. If it comes from Africa, but the first thing, you're always going to look at what your people have created first. That's just a psychological, functional, healthy
Yeah.
person that does that. But some of the great thinkers, after they explore their own stuff, they look
Yeah.
at other places to
Yeah.
see what works. So you can do Africological study of
Right.
anything.
And if you and the risk is that
Anything.
if you're using other methodological frameworks, those frameworks are tied to the agenda of those groups of people, right?
Right.
That when we look at, so you talk about
Right.
activism, right? And you talked about Colin Kaepernick in your article, and we talk about sort of how Colin Kaepernick is viewed and the image that society has sort of imagined of him in his political engagement. He kneels for the national anthem, and all of a sudden that becomes radical, right? When did kneeling become radical, right? That just by kneeling, you're all of a sudden a radical, right? So what is it that athletes do that makes their actions political? I know that was one of the questions that someone posed. Is there something that unique athletes do that make it political?
Well, number one, there's this myth that sports is not political. That's a myth. It's a lie. Sports is political. How do we know? Every game, watch the NFL game. They run out. Someone runs out with a flag, a U.S. flag. Watch some more games. You'll see politicians at games, and they're just not regular participants. They come out. They throw the first pitch. They may in some teams strike a cannon, a military symbol.
The
You
military
have
jets
the
come.
the
They sing
planes.
"God Bless America" at
So,
seventh inning stretch.
oh yeah, it's very political. The issue is when those people that talk about politics that should not be talking about politics have their voices heard. That's when it's an issue. When the bodies start to display that they have a mind, they're supposed to
Isn't
just
that
be
like this
bodies.
meta politics,
You
right? There's
know,
politics within the discussion of politics, right? That we're going to
yeah,
say that this isn't political, but then when we do it, then it is political. That whole idea itself are the racial dynamics and the racial politics of America.
Right. You're only as good as your mind. That's it. And then when your body doesn't work, I like the analogy that you used in the chapter. About the horse race. The people riding the horses when their job is done, they're treated like the old slave. They're taken back into the country and
And
left to die. In
and
a
that's
cabin in
what
the woods. It's
when
the
I
same.
talked before about this idea of how when black athletes get into a position, then things change, right? That back in the turn of the century, the 1900s, the early 1900s, we had horse jockeying and horse racing that was big. Black people dominated the Kentucky Derby as jockeys. Well, they would take pictures of the jockeys when they were predominantly white, and then black jockeys started to become big. So they can't just take pictures and have paintings of black jockeys. They had to center the horse as the talent. So they take pictures of the horse with the jockey kind of in the back. Well, and eventually what ended up happening is black athletes and black jockeys ended up becoming the horse. They end up becoming the thing that's treated in that way, right? They're not treated like human beings. They're treated like horses, like just animals, right? That are competing that are competing for the entertainment of white folks, and that they're disposable, they're exploitable, that if they say anything or do anything that's wrong, they could potentially be put down in a very symbolic or theoretical way, right? And so these are the things that go on in terms of when black people get in these positions, the institutions change. So we can't just, strive to be what white folks are, because when we get there, it's going to be different. The institution's going to be different.
Yeah, and they're going to create. Yeah, and rules are going to be created as they go along when you start to go beyond what their rules can allow. It's just it's a system, so they have to maintain the deity and the one subservient to the deity, and that's throughout all the different reaches of its system. They have to be the deity in image and beauty and in value, and then we're the anti-deity. So you can be used, your body could be used, but once you start to get into deity territory, that you actually have a mind of your own and you actually have experiences of your own that matter, then you're no good. You're no
Yeah,
good
yeah.
unless you can be
So there was
used.
one more question before we end this, but it's this idea of, you mentioned Ice Cube and the Big Three becoming an alternative league. Much like the Negro League was an all-black institution, owned, operated, patronized by black folks. It was the black people that were at the concession stands and owned all the concession stands. Black people attended, black people played, right? Should there be a league much like the Negro League in sports, or should it be something different altogether?
There should be a sports league, but it should be connected to the community of people that create it. And it shouldn't be called the Negro League. Not let's erase that Negro, get that out of here. But it should be relevant and it should be relevant to actual practical skills that people need. We also can't make athletes into demigods. Like athletes are good for entertaining and they good for exhibiting skill, but our lives shouldn't be revolving around what athletes do. I'm sorry. I was an athlete and I love to play sports, but the sports that we need. I mean, I wish I knew how to fish. I wish I joined like a fishing league, or like I did martial arts and I did some training in martial arts. So that would have been good to train in martial arts. The point is that when you leave the sports leagues, number one, you're not dried up and dusty with no energy. You haven't given all your blood to it. And then number two, you actually have a skill that your community could utilize. Maybe you could train security. Maybe you could fish to bring food in. Things like that are actually practical. But I think it has to be disconnected, or at least in competition. At least in competition with Western sports industry, because there's too much blood that's drawn from the colonial sports industry. People leave. Yeah, it's too much blood drawn. So if you're gonna draw blood for your own interests, draw blood for your own goals. That would be my recommendation.
Right.
No
right.
Negro League.
There was another question I think I'm going to touch on this, and it said that should like the entourage of black athletes include like a minister of finance, a minister of information to advise them and make sure they're informed. And I think that it's more than that, right? What you're talking about is community building. I think everyone should seek out mentors, right? Everyone should have a Baba and a Umi that they get mentored by, that they learn from, that they sit at the feet of, right, with elders and folks in the community. Because the people that are doing the things that create change have those people around them, right? It's not just designating, you can designate one person to be your information minister, but it's not just about that. It's about connecting with the community. The reason why Colin Kaepernick does what he does and is as informed as the way he is because as a 49er, he's in a locker room with a guy by the name of Harry Edwards, who's also a part of the 49ers, but he's also the one who initiated the Olympic boycott in 1968, where John Carlos Tommy Smith raised their fist on the podium. Right. He was their sociology of sports professor. Now he's with the 49ers. Of course, Colin Kaepernick is being informed, right? When we talk about other people like Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X was one of his best friends. Even when we talk about different folks in Philly, like Malcolm Jenkins, right? Of course, Mark Lamont Hill is talking to people like Malcolm Jenkins and people like Bennett, what's his name? One of the Bennett brothers, right? Yeah, he's talking to Bennett, and then Michael Bennett comes out with a book, right, called "The Things That Scare White People." But it's their connection to the community that allows them to be and keeps them informed, and that's what's important, right? Is that these athletes stay connected to the community, and they'll get that information.
People like Dave Chappelle, his peoples was Black Studies people. They were in Black Studies. So there's no small reason why Dave Chappelle has a historical understanding of things, because he's been trained in that. So that information piece is critical. That grounding in your experiences is critical to help you produce what you need to produce. So you can not just throw paint on the wall and say it's good, but you can actually do something to say that, yeah, we're actually benefiting from it.
All right. I think that we are out of time. We're a little bit over time, but this was a great discussion. So I kind of wanted to let it continue. But yes, I want to leave our viewers, I guess, our IG Live folks with something, some departing words. So I'll let you kind of go first and talk a little bit about some things that you want to leave folks with.
The main thing that I would say is the revolution starts at home. It starts in your house. It starts in the relationships that you have to bring forth your next generations. So take that seriously. Think about that. Before you jump into any revolutionary ideology, know that it will die if you can't carry it forth to the next generation. So start in your home, figure that out, reach out to people that are actually have fruit in that category. Don't go to somebody that, has no fruit in that category. Go to somebody that actually is proven, get advice, and start in that place. And then just move forward. The sky is the limit. You could do anything that you desire to do, and you're blessed. The universal law will guide you if what you're doing is right. So seek out trusted mentors, people that actually have fruit, and live your life.
Yes. I guess I'll leave folks with saying that the way in which we approach our work and the way in which we approach really taking that work and putting it to practical use for our communities are all undergirded by these fundamental frameworks, right? These methodological frameworks of Afrocentricity, Africology, Africana studies that allow us to really understand or make assumptions about what is significant and important for Black folks specifically. And it's important to do that because those are the people that we're studying. And it's important to match the methodology with the phenomena, with the people, with the culture, right? And then, of course, utilizing that for our own communities. And so this is what I do in sports. This is what we've done in sports with this book. Again, this is Sports in African American Life, essays on history and culture. I am Dr. Drew Brown. My chapter is in the book as well with my co-author, Christina Canoe. This is Dr. Mikaya Yehuda, whose chapter is also in the book. I urge you to pick this up and read through that. There's some other great chapters as well. But I'm going to end there. Thank you, Dr. Yehuda, and I appreciate you all with your questions, comments, and all of that.
Thank you. TUFM.
There we go.